Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel, and in the video today, we're looking at the fascinating story of Jack the Signalman. For most people, saying a monkey could do my job is a roundabout way of saying that their current position of employment isn't exactly that mentally taxing. For James White, though, it was more a statement of fact, because for 9 years in the late 19th century, his job of railroad signalman at Uitenhage Station in South Africa was literally done by a Chakma baboon called Jack. Jack came to prominence thanks to a tragic event in 1877 when his eventual owner, James White, lost both of his legs in a horrific accident. Prior to the accident, White had worked for Cape Government Railways as a guard. During his tenure as a railway guard, White developed a knack for jumping between and onto moving trains, which earned him the wholly unimaginative nickname Jumper. If you're thinking that White's habit of jumping between moving trains had something to do with him eventually losing both of his legs, you are absolutely correct. After mistiming a jump between two trains, White landed on the tracks and was unable to move in time to stop the 80-ton car from crushing his shins and feet. The damage was so extensive that White's legs had to be amputated at the knees, leaving him crippled and of little use to the company. Not to be dissuaded, after recovering from his injuries, White carved himself a pair of peg legs and begged his superiors at the railway company to give him a job. White's pleas didn't fall on deaf ears, and he was given the job of signalman, which basically put him in charge of conveying information to conductors via the various signals placed on the tracks. Although the job required little physical strenuous activity, since all of the signals were controlled by a series of levers that White could reach from a chair, he still had trouble getting to and from work. To help with this, the ever-industrious White made himself a trolley that he could sit on. Even with the trolley, getting to work was still a hugely tiring endeavor for White, and for a while he struggled with this task until, according to a July of 1890 edition of the science journal Nature, White spotted the fuzzy solution to all of his problems: a baboon leading an oxen cart at his local market in 1881. A curious White struck up a conversation with the animal's owner and learned that along with being trained to obey a few simple commands, the baboon, who was called Jack, was sufficiently strong enough to push and pull relatively heavy loads. Upon learning this, White asked the owner if he'd be willing to part with the animal so that he could train it to push him to and from work. The owner, perhaps moved by White's condition, or maybe White just offered a price he couldn't refuse, for whatever reason, agreed to give up ownership of Jack. Again, according to Nature, before the two men parted ways, the owner explained to White that he should give Jack a tot of Cape brandy every night if he wanted him to work, as without it, the baboon would spend the next day sulking and would even become disobedient. This is similar to the famous circus elephant Jumbo, who would reportedly get very annoyed if his trainer forgot to give him a bottle of beer before he went to sleep. Initially, White simply trained Jack to push his trolley, which had been designed by White to fit on the train tracks along the half-mile section of track between his house and the signal box he worked in. It wasn't long before White realized that Jack was a lot smarter than he'd assumed and could be trained for other tasks. For example, one of White's duties involved grabbing a key to a coal box store from a locked box and delivering it to train drivers when they tooted their whistles 4 times. After only a few days of working together, Jack picked up on this and soon began grabbing the key before White could whenever he heard the appropriate number of whistles and delivered it himself. With a bit of training, Jack also learned to operate the levers in the signal box that controlled which section of track a train would travel on as it passed by, similarly picking up on the audio cues given by drivers. While the system itself wasn't that complicated, consisting of a few levers that controlled certain pieces of track that would be pulled in a certain order based on whether a driver tooted 1, 2, or 3 times, and is something you could probably train a dog to do with the right setup, Jack had something dogs don't have: opposable thumbs. This made him a bit more useful with the equipment at hand. Jack soon became a familiar figure at the signals hut, and drivers didn't take too long to become accustomed to the unusual sight of a disabled man and a baboon working in tandem whenever they passed through Uitenhage Station. As you can imagine though, some passengers weren't exactly enthused with the idea of their lives literally being in the hands of a baboon, and after one particular member of the public caught sight of Jack in the signal hut, a complaint was filed and the pair were unceremoniously fired. White appealed to the company to reconsider their decision, arguing that Jack actually knew what he was doing. After several more workers stepped forward to argue that, in their experience, Jack was doing a pretty decent job prior to being fired, the company begrudgingly agreed to give the baboon a test. Wanting to make sure Jack could handle even the most complicated of scenarios, the test was structured such that they played a series of rapidly changing whistles at Jack after placing him in front of a set of levers with the same layout as those in the signal hut. Jack passed this test without making a single mistake, and he and Wide were given their jobs back. Since Jack was now an official employee of the company instead of just a pet Wide brought to work, Nature reported he was given a salary of 20 cents per day, which is about $5 today. He was also given daily rations and a beer on Saturdays. Hiring Jack proved to be a smart move for the company, since not only did they get a tourist attraction that brought people from all over to ride their trains to see the baboon, but they also got a fiercely loyal guard with imposing baboon arms to chase away vandals and trespassers. Besides signal operator and occasional guard, during his time with the company, Jack was also reportedly trained to clean, move railway sleepers, garden, and was officially put in charge of the keys to the coal yard. Unfortunately, Jack met an untimely end when he contracted and died from consumption in 1890, which interestingly enough, Old World monkeys like Jack are highly susceptible to, unlike New World monkeys. In total, Jack worked for the railway company for about 9 years before his death. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do give us a like below, it really helps out. And if you did enjoy this video, you'll probably enjoy some of our others, which are linked to over there on the right. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.